Good afternoon and welcome to Akron Roundtable. I'm John Stefanik, President of the Akron Roundtable Board of Directors. Akron Roundtable is brought to you today over radio station WKSU 89.7 FM from Quaker Square on the University of Akron campus in downtown Akron, Ohio. The radio broadcast is underwritten by Cascade Avenue. Today's luncheon is sponsored by KeyBank. Our title sponsor throughout our 2018 season is Cleveland Clinic Akron General. Please mark your calendar now for our November 15th luncheon when the Akron Roundtable will host Jude Kearney, founder and president, Kearney Africa Legal Advisors, who will present on the topic, Africa's Economic Development, a Few Hurdles Yet to Clear. To make a reservation for this or any of the Akron Roundtable's luncheons, or to purchase a subscription to our luncheon series, please visit our website, akronroundtable.org. Today, the Akron Roundtable is pleased to welcome Jason Dodson, Chief of Staff to Summit County Executive Eileen Shapiro, James Hardy, Chief of Staff, City of Akron, Steve Millard, President and CEO of the Greater Akron Chamber of Commerce, and Christine Mayer, President of the GAR Foundation. We'll now invite Mark Merklin, Chair of the Greater Akron Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, to introduce our speakers.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today and for your interest in this work. On behalf of the Chamber, County Executive Eileen Shapiro, and City of Akron Mayor Dan Horrigan, I'd like to welcome you to what I hope is the first of a number of conversations you are engaged in related to the economic development strategy emerging from the work of our organizations. I am pleased to be able to introduce the core team that has been driving this work so that they can share with you its direction and scope. Although Mayor Horrigan and County Executive Shapiro have dedicated considerable time to these efforts, they have made key people on their staffs available to dedicate many hours to these efforts. Special thanks as well to Don Taylor, my predecessor as chair of the Greater Akron Chamber, and from Welty Building Company for his work on this as well, and all of his efforts. This work was conceived about 18 months ago as the Chamber was beginning a leadership transition process, and both the city and the county had relatively new executive leadership. Greater Akron itself was undergoing a lot of changes in leadership roles in key institutions. We felt the time was right to ask the question, how can we better collaborate on issues important to the growth and success of our region? How do we maximize the opportunity for success and do so efficiently given limited resources? We believe we have the start of a new partnership, a new joint initiative, and a broad collaboration on work that can help us create the growth and investment critical to our community. You've seen the bios of each of the individuals on our panel today, and many of you work closely with them in the organizations they have led over time. By way of introduction, I'd say that each brings a unique perspective and constituency to the work, and each of them are also enthusiastic, collaborative, and well qualified to help us navigate the effort ahead that we're pleased to outline for you today. Jason Dodson serves as Chief of Staff to the Summit County Executive Eileen Shapiro and brings deep expertise in the tactics and politics of driving work to attract, retain, and expand companies and drive the economic development work of the county. James Hardy serves as Deputy Mayor for Integrated Development and Chief of Staff to City of Akron Mayor Dan Horrigan. James has a passion for our city and for driving its dynamism and a sense of place that will drive people and businesses to make Akron their home. Christine Mayer, as President of the GAR Foundation, has provided financial support, a focus on big picture, what-if ideas, and a connection to economic development strategy and ideas from colleagues and peers in philanthropy and economic development, both in Northeast Ohio and nationally. Last but not least, Steve Millard serves as President and CEO of the Greater Akron Chamber. And in just the 4 months he's been on the job here in Akron, he's hit the ground running to help the Chamber better connect the voice of the business community to the economic development and civic agenda for Greater Akron. I'm now going to turn it over to our panel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Mayer of GAR Foundation. You probably could have figured that out by process of elimination. Pleased to see such a big crowd here to hear about Elevate Akron. And just to give you kind of an overview of where we plan to go, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the background and history of what brought us to this point. And I'll share with you 8 key findings that are based on data about Akron's current economy. And my colleagues will walk you through 5 strategies that will guide work based on the key findings. We'll also talk about outcomes we're hoping for, partners who will be a part of this work, and next steps. And lastly, we will have time for questions and answers. So first, to start with the beginning, Mark Merklin mentioned that this work started a while back when there was transition in executive leadership at the city, the county, and the chamber all at the same time. At GAR Foundation, we observed Mayor Horgan was new in his role, County Executive Shapiro was new in her role, and the chamber was in a transition and sort of examining what its best role would be in the community. And we thought that at that moment, where everybody had a very open mind about the work, it'd be a good time to come together and talk about how best to coordinate activities, collaborate more effectively. But then when we got into the work, we started with a really data-based examination of our economy and a look at the larger national economy. When we did that, we discovered that not only were there opportunities for us to work together in different ways to coordinate better, but there are also new kinds of work that we should be advancing in economic development given the structural changes in the economy. So from that, you'll see the findings that we'll talk about and then the strategies. We call it the new fundamentals. It's really a new kind of work to advance economic development in our community. We've been talking to lots of people all around town about these ideas. Today is our first sort of public debut to such a big audience, and we certainly look forward to lots of engagement back and forth and dialogue as this work continues to evolve. So first, our 8 key findings. Number 1, the Akron regional economy is neither distressed nor dynamic. So we weren't the worst of the bunch. Our economy was not sort of on fire when you looked at us relative to data from other communities, and yet at the same time, we were not intentionally placing bets and developing strengths in some of the emerging opportunities that will dominate the future. The second finding is that our sort of status quo economy or economic approach faces considerable headwinds from the national economy. So this gets to issues such as globalization, the high-tech giants, the agglomeration of talent and investment in the coastal cities and in other large cities. When you look at all of those phenomena, which are bigger than our community, you can see that a community of our size faces some threats if it doesn't sort of get in front of some of these issues and be really planful. The third finding follows logically from that, which is traditional economic development approaches are proving incapable of meeting the challenges in this new structure. Again, when the sort of game has changed significantly, and we are using some tactics from a decades-old playbook, that's probably not the best approach. You can see from this slide that business relocations are down 50%. This is not just in Akron, this is a nationwide phenomenon. So to the extent that economic development practitioners were spending a lot of time attracting companies to come to their community, you can see that that is not a high return activity when companies are not relocating in the way that they once did. The fourth finding is that our regional economic development system is somewhat outdated and fragmented. The example here is just one example of many you could give, but our foreign direct investment strategies, which had been focused a lot on greenfield investments, were significantly underperforming strategies that focus on mergers and acquisitions and exports. So those kinds of efforts where you work with the companies you already have on merger and acquisition strategies or on how they can export more effectively with other parts of the nation or the world seem to be delivering better outcomes. So the thinking is we should sort of get smarter and stronger in some of those tactics. The fifth finding is that, this one's good news, there are several potentially transformative but overlooked economic development opportunities for us here in Akron. First among them is our middle market companies. A lot of economic development practice is focused on large companies for obvious reasons. Our large companies are really important corporate citizens, and we want to keep them happy and growing here in our place. But when you look at the data, a lot of net new job creation comes from middle market companies. We have a lot of middle market companies in our region, and the thinking is that you spend more of your resource, investment, and time on helping those folks to grow, expand, prosper, stay here. You're going to get a lot of bang for your buck out of that. The sixth finding is that we are somewhat behind in terms of our workforce skills when we consider the demand for digitized and mid-tech occupations. You can see from this slide that for jobs that require STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math, those jobs are taking more than twice as long to fill in our region. And so that's a pipeline issue. It's something that we can address and that we can sort of pivot and better prepare our people in our region already to be better equipped for the jobs of the future. The seventh finding is that much of Akron, and particularly its African American population, has been excluded from economic opportunity and just has not shared in prosperity at nearly the same levels as our white citizens. This is another one where the data tells a particularly sort of abysmal story, frankly, for our community. We are near the bottom, in the bottom 10 of 100 metro areas and the bottom 5 of 100 metro areas with respect to job employment and income growth for our African American population. Our thinking is, rather than blaming or fretting over this, to accept the fact of this situation and to shape economic development strategies that directly address this and are very intentional about making sure that we're being inclusive in who has opportunity and how we are sharing prosperity going forward. And then our eighth finding is that our relatively anemic growth in downtown and in other key job hubs has hindered our economic development. When you look at, again, some peer cities about our same size in the Midwest, you can see that we are behind pretty significantly in terms of downtown residential living. And that somewhat hinders us with respect to millennial workforce, which is an important factor. And it also does not take advantage of the potential power of our downtown as a job hub, where a lot of jobs can be close to a lot of people who need jobs. So focusing a little more intentionally there, we think is going to have a lot of lift. And there again, downtown is really at a tipping point. There's been fantastic work in the downtown plan from Downtown Akron Partnership in the city. So we are positioned to make that pivot and really capitalize on some opportunities there. Those are the findings, and I will now look to my good colleagues to tell us the 5 strategies that build from those.
Thank you, Christine. And I will take the first and probably the least sexy of the 5 strategies. It's a relatively blocking and tackling strategy, but I think it's one that's very, very important and underlines kind of the general theme of these 5 strategies, and that's really getting back to the new fundamentals of economic development. As I said recently, a lot of athletes are able to win a lot of championships by focusing on the fundamentals. But in order to be able to do that here locally, we need to look at, with those new market findings and with the 21st century economy, what are the new fundamentals? Because we can't do business simply the way that we used to do it in the past. And so strategy number 1 is to take a new approach to business retention and expansion here in the local economy. And what that means is quite simply, historically, we have taken a relatively non-targeted, what I've called a shotgun approach towards economic development, and we've coupled that with focusing very heavily on our attraction efforts. Now, if you look at the data, 80-85%, depending on where you look, of your economic growth comes from your small and your medium-sized companies, your kind of mom and pop shops, all the way up to your 150, 250 employers. And unfortunately, collectively, the city and the county have not really spent the time and energy and effort to groom those companies and ensure that those companies are able to be successful. So the first part of the strategy is to really move away from, not to get rid of attraction altogether, but to move away from attraction being the primary focus and to really focus on those businesses that we have here. And quite honestly, to look at certain groups within the existing businesses and really develop long-term strategic relationships with those businesses. So what we plan to do is to target about 120, I think we've got on the slide 120, we've talked about maybe even up to 150 local companies, with the largest, about half of that grouping being your mid-market firms, which going back to, I think it was finding number 6, either 5 or 6, 1% of our growth, or 72% of our growth is captured within 1% of our companies. So those are really the companies that we should be focusing our efforts on and meeting with. We also know that we have a particularly high skill with the polymer industry, so we need to be meeting with 20 to 25 of our high-end polymer drivers within the community. We also need to look at our scale-up companies and driving those companies that have gotten past the startup phase and ensuring that they become mature firms and get to a point where they're able to have that 150, 250 employee base here in the community. And then lastly, as you drive around the community, you see that we have a large number of entities that are owned by foreign companies and have a subsidiary locally. Unfortunately, our organizations in the past have done a lot of what's called greenfield attraction to try to bring new foreign investment over here from other countries. And what we need to do is work with those foreign-owned firms that are already here in order to make sure that we're meeting their needs and addressing what they need to be successfully here locally. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on what really is going on in the national economy that's happening here as well. And that is, foreign companies, by and large, are not saying, hey, let's figure out how to go over to the United States and start from scratch. Typically, they're looking at mergers and acquisitions, or they're looking to import here. And conversely, our local businesses are looking how they can increase their export business as well. And so what we're working through already and what we hope to accomplish is to really turn away from that greenfield attraction and focus on the import-export dynamic, as well as the mergers and acquisitions, which we believe, and I would say that the data suggests, is what really grows economic growth from a foreign direct investment point of view. And finally, the last thing I'll say on this strategy is that we really are going to take a targeted approach on those top 25 large employers within our company to make sure that we have long-standing, established relationships with those companies so that we don't have the fire drill mentality of, hey, one of those top 25 companies is called, they're looking at options potentially of locating in the South, or they may stay here, and we're starting from square one in terms of trying to keep that business here. We need to have a long-term established relationship so that they feel comfortable to pick up the phone and have those discussions way before it gets to the point of having a site selector on board, and we've got to assemble our army of incentives against the army of incentives from some southern state. And so that's really some of the tactics behind what we hope to accomplish with strategy number one. And with that, I'll turn it over to James.
All right. So as you heard in Christine's presentations on the key findings, pardon me, getting over a cold. One of the things that we have to grapple with as leaders of the community and accept as fact, because it is that we are in the lowest tier of the 100 metropolitan service areas in terms of economic inclusion. There are a lot of reasons why that is. Many of them systemic and have happened over generations. But to Christine's point, strategy number two, which we call Opportunity Akron, is all about moving forward and building a foundation for an accessible, inclusive economy. And so the first thing that we're going to do is develop a regional narrative around what we mean by racial and economic inclusion. We've heard this in presentations that we have made prior to today. What does it mean to have an inclusive economy? What specifically are we talking about when it comes to the Akron metro area? What are our specific challenges? And defining those so that we are all working from the same place. One of the things that Christine has shared with us that we typically talk about in this presentation is that a quote from an economic developer that has worked a lot in this space, who says that the most left-leaning do-gooder and the most right-leaning capitalist can both see reasons why an inclusive economy is good for all. And so we want to work hand in glove with the chamber leading this effort to create that narrative and invite folks to the table, traditional and non-traditional alike, to define for ourselves what we mean by racial inclusion and economic inclusion, and where do we want to go forward as a region. Second, we are going to develop capacity to integrate economic inclusion into all the strategies you hear today. So clearly, we have a challenge that, again, as I said, is systemic and institutional, that needs to be its own standalone strategy. But every single one of the strategies you hear today needs to have a lens of inclusion, otherwise it won't work. And so the chamber, in partnership with the city, will be making a strategic hire together to help lead this work, to make sure that everything we're doing and everything you're hearing today is done with a lens of inclusion based on that narrative we're going to develop together. And then finally, as you heard also in the 8 key findings, yes, we have a skills gap in the community, but specifically when you drill into the data, we have a pretty significant digital skills gap. But yet there are jobs available today. So one of the stats you may have seen from Connexus, which is local data, is that for every mid-tech career or job opening, there are 3 to 10 graduates for those. Did I say that right? Yeah. There are job opportunities out there for folks in mid-tech. When we say mid-tech, we mean those technological enhanced jobs, again, that require STEM skills. I had it the opposite way. I knew I had it the opposite way. So there's my one flub. Now we can move on. There are jobs for people in the mid-tech industry right here in Akron in the metro area, but the problem is we have a disconnect between the jobs and the skills. When we say mid-tech, we mean those jobs that do require STEM skills but don't require a 4-year baccalaureate degree. They might be a stackable credential or an associate's degree or something other than that on-the-job training. So there's a great opportunity for us right here and now to bring those two things together. So we know we have opportunity in mid-tech. We know we have a population that is being excluded from economic opportunity. Are there things we can do together to create opportunity now while we're working on some of the longer-term strategies? I also have the privilege of doing the next strategy, which we call Spark Akron. So you heard in Christine's key findings there that we're not as distressed as some folks might think we are, but we're not as dynamic either. New firm starts nationwide are down. They're down in Akron and the Akron area as well. So if we are going to prepare ourselves for the 21st century economy, we have to increase our dynamism substantially. And we're already starting to do that. So the first piece of this strategy is realizing the full potential of Bounce. For those that might not be aware, the city transitioned our Global Business Accelerator to a new open innovation hub that we hope will be a regional asset, not just for the city, but for the entire Metro Akron area. Bounce is where everything should be coming together. It's where firm-to-firm connections happen. It's where the University of Akron student or the Stark State student or the Kent State student meets with a researcher at Akron Children's Hospital and they start working together. It's the clearinghouse of entrepreneurship activity. But yet Bounce is new. I'm looking at Doug right now, and I'm sure Doug would say he could use all the help he can get. We need to make sure that Bounce is successful if we're going to increase dynamism in our local economy. Second, we need to focus on the most promising tech startups, and not just tech, but startups in general. How many of you, question and answer for me now, how many of you have ever heard of the company Fuse Chicken? All right, I venture to say we barely made 1%. Don't feel bad, because our consultants asked us that question as well. Fuse Chicken, for those who don't know, is the highest ranked company in the Akron metro area, a tech startup on the Inc. 5000 list, which is a publicly published list of high-tech startups in the country. We looked around ourselves and we realized that the county hadn't called on them, the city hadn't called on them, and the chamber had never called on them. In fact, nobody knew who they were. This part of the strategy is about making sure that never happens again. So we were going to wrap around our top 25 to 30 tech startups in the BRE strategy to make sure, as Jason said, that they realize their full potential here in Akron, in the Akron region. And lastly, but certainly not least, we need to reinvigorate connections between our firms and our research universities. So if Akron and the Akron area are going to be dynamic in our economy again, we hear a lot about Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh is doing all kinds of things. They've got Uber, they've got Lyft, they're doing autonomous vehicles. As much as I would love to say that my colleagues in Pittsburgh had a lot to do with that, Uber and Lyft are there because of Carnegie Mellon's robotics lab. They were working together before the public sector got involved and seeded it. We need to do everything we can to encourage and support our local research universities and our firms to be better connected. Bounce is part of that, but it's also within their own R&D and their own academic pursuits to make sure that we create a space here in our Akron metro area where the firm to university connection is strong.
I will go ahead and take the fourth strategy, which is refocusing on our urban centers. And kind of the way I like to describe this strategy is to say it really is two sub-strategies within a strategy. And so the first half of that is to make sure that we continue the momentum and make a reality of the downtown development plan. Susie Graham and her staff at the Downtown Akron Partnership have done an amazing job putting together kind of a blueprint of what downtown Akron could be and should be. And I think many of you are familiar, whether you're working on them or actually reading in the newspaper about them, on a number of key projects that are going to be critical to making that happen. The reality is there is so much more that does need to be done than what our existing projects are. And as we talked about earlier when Christine was going through some of the data, the reality is we are lagging behind our peers with that downtown economic development, particularly on the residential side. And so collectively, our organizations and many other organizations in this room are going to have to work together to really get those projects over the finish line and use those as catalysts to keep downtown moving even more than it already is. From the county's perspective, we have our geographic territory is obviously broader than the city of Akron. But I think everybody in the room would acknowledge that having a strong downtown Akron is not only key to Akron's health, but it is key to not only Summit County's health, but the region as well. And so the first strategy is to really make sure that we continue to move forward on the downtown plan. The second strategy is to focus on what we've called job hubs. And when I say we, I really don't want to take credit up here because Team NEO and the Fund for Our Economic Future essentially brought that concept to us. And they've identified 12 key job hubs throughout Summit County, 5 in Akron, Barberton, Richfield, Twinsburg, Greene, and Cuyahoga Falls, and Stowe. I'm trying to hope I got all of those. And really what we need to do with this strategy is not only market those areas as key areas where businesses should be locating, where we have a number of assets that can already be utilized in terms of buildings and land in those areas, but we also need to make sure that we're targeting our infrastructure investments and our workforce investments in those areas. And so when we talk about an area, probably the easiest example is to talk about the East End development in Akron all the way down to the airport. If you look at that area and what we've done over the last 10 years, we've really kind of turned that neighborhood around, not only with the Goodyear development, but as we see the backfill of what used to be the Goodyear headquarters. That's one of those 12 job hubs, and we need to make sure that we're doing that work in all of those 12 job hubs to really match up our infrastructure investments, our workers, and as we hope to grow companies or bring new companies in, that's really where we need to focus. One thing before I do turn it over to Steve is I will tell you that these strategies are at different levels of advancement. I will tell you this is probably out of the 5 strategies the one that's been developed the most and the one that's had the most work done on it. And certainly I want to acknowledge the county team, the city team, the chamber team, and our partners who have really played a key role in not only putting this strategy, but really all of the strategies together and are really going to be critical to any of this being successful.
Thanks, Jason. I'm going to try to finish this up here in the next 3 minutes so we can get to some questions. But as we think about the last of the 5 strategies, the last one is called Elevate Akron. And this is on focusing on connecting our ecosystem more effectively and the resources that we have in this community better together to provide more seamless support to our companies and the work that we're doing to grow and drive the economy here in Greater Akron. As we look at this, we talk about a lot of these organizations and we talk about a lot of the work that we're doing. We have to do a good job telling the stories of not only this region, what it's unique and differentiating about it, but also our companies here and the resources that they need and the resources they have to take things to the next level. So this strategy is all about connecting and collaborating the players that we have in the ecosystem to ensure that we're doing the most we can with the resources we have to differentiate and grow Greater Akron. As we think about our overall goal then for this work, it's really to transform the culture of economic development to ensure we get opportunity for all residents and also position the Greater Akron region on a new trajectory in an era of rapid global change. That's a big mouthful, but we have to do better. One of the quotes that says this most simply, I was talking to Chuck Jones from First Energy about this, and he said, we just need more meters turning faster. So I like the simplicity of this approach there, but the idea, I mean, what's your meter in your business, And what's the metric of how much your business is doing better, your organization is doing better. And we have to think about that for everybody that we've got in the region. We think about what comes out of this. There are specific metrics that we're working through, but there are three broad things we're looking for. Excellence in the new fundamentals. Taking our region ahead by doing a better job doing the blocking and tackling that makes growth and success happen every single day. It's not about just one win. It's about a series of activities, partnerships, and relationships that move the ball forward every single day. Secondly, smart investments in the future economy. What are those places where we're going to make some bets for this region that are going to be different, that are going to sort of put us on the map in a new way? We think mid-tech digital skills could be one big area, could be polymers, it could be some other areas of focus, but we need to pick a couple places and excel there. And third, shared prosperity, and this is a really important point. We got to make sure that the opportunity that we drive reaches everyone. One of the things that the fund says is where growth happening is important, but where growth happens is even more important, and who growth affects is important as well. We need to make sure that we have a real shift in the way inclusion and economic opportunity reaches everyone, and especially make sure we have focused, measured results there, including a different complexion, if you will, of the leadership groups and the dialogues that are happening around our region. And that'll be another goal of our work. So where are we? We feel like we are, we've made some good progress on the thinking, but we really are at the end of the very beginning. We've done the initial work to think about where we have to go. Now, it still looks good on paper, but we have to start making real progress. Begin to convene partners around this work, which we've already started to do. There are more than 20 partners and counting that are involved in helping to collaborate with this, more than 70 leaders engaged. And there are additional opportunities for engagement for all of you in the room and for other organizations that want to get engaged in this work. Our job is to sort of, we're putting the strategy out there and we're trying to drive the work overall forward, but every one of your organizations, every one of you has a role to play in it, and we hope that you will join us with that. So with that, I think we're open to some questions.
And I have questions from the Ask Our Technology. If people want to send any more, I'm not up here checking my text messages like my kids would be. The first question relates to something you just touched on a little bit, Steve. This person says, this is a great, logical, collaborative economic development plan. How will we know we are successful? What are the metrics? And I think that you've given a quick touch on that, but if you might answer this person's question a little more.
So we're still working on that. I mean, we know we need metrics here because for a lot of you, you know, what you measure and what you're looking at is how you're going to sort of track success there. From our perspective, there's some big milestones, collaboration and connectivity across these things. We have some fundamental things that we're looking for in terms of the way the system works together and the way those who use the system evaluate the system, right? How do our companies react and what do they think about the work that we're doing there? It's not just about a number of jobs and an amount of investment, though those are metrics that we'll track as we go along. It's really about how we do every single day with the fundamentals, as we said. We think by the end of the first quarter, we will have not only more detailed sort of tactics here laid out, but also a specific set of measures and milestones that all of our stakeholders, their bosses, my boss, everybody's boss is looking for us to have in this process.
A couple of questions that are related, so I'll just kind of read them together and you guys can jump in. How will you measure success of increasing African American participation in economic growth? What will that look like? And then related to that, what have been the barriers to economic inclusion for the African American community?
Sure, I'll give a. So, obviously, even up here is not the most inclusive group that we could have. So, what I offer is certainly what we've seen in the data, but you know, I grew up a white kid in Akron, so there's a lot of this that I'm not going to be able to fully empathize with or understand. But I think that from a metrics perspective, look, we were able to identify ourselves as among the worst in the 100 metro areas based on data that is collected already. So there are good metrics around economic inclusion that are national, that are tracked, and that we should be looking at. The Fund for Economic Future is also looking at new regional metrics for economic inclusion that we should pay close attention to and try to adopt ourselves. You know, if it works for the region, it should work for us. From my perspective, why are we in this boat? I think that it's, as I said, systemic, it's institutional, it's generational. You can point to redlining You can point to deed restrictions. We can point to just over 200, almost 250 years of racial exclusion in the United States that we're still grappling with to a certain extent. Even in our work in infant mortality, this question comes up a lot. Why the disparity? Well, when you have chattel slavery for 150, almost 200 years, and then Jim Crow for 100 years, and then post-civil rights for only the last 50 or so, we have to be honest with ourselves that we're dealing with this still. And there aren't great answers, but we can no longer just excuse it. And we have to work on it together. So that's going to require all of us, myself included, to get out of our comfort zones, to create partnerships, as I said, with both traditional and non-traditional, about how we start to change this, first the narrative, but then the actual outcomes. It's just no longer acceptable, not just for Akron. It's not just us in a microcosm. This is happening across the country, looking at economic inclusion and income disparity. It's a communal issue that we all have to deal with.
I think, just to be specific, I mean, income metrics, inclusion in certain job skills and job areas, like as we look at mid-tech, what's the participation of the minority community in these mid-tech jobs? And we'll be looking down the path of specific participation. I mean, that's what you can measure income, you can measure employment, you can measure participation. We'll be looking at that at different levels.
Okay, we have a really long time. We have a question. How do we get involved? Where do we sign up? Steve, you want to give some thoughts?
So one of the roles that the Chamber is going to play here is to sort of drive and support the management of all these efforts, and there's a heck of a lot of them. So we will probably make available, maybe on the website or whatever, a ways for folks to get to us as part of the initiative. There'll be different levels. I mean, there are some organizations and people that will naturally be involved because their organizations are working on this work and want to collaborate with us on it. Others of you may just want to keep track of what's going on in certain areas. So we're building that infrastructure of involvement, if you will, and engagement, and we will be following up with the community broadly on that. Many of your organizations, if you think you can help in this space, please get in touch with me specifically or any of the partners here, but we will get you connected to the work that's happening if you so desire to be.
Christine, point of privilege. Just to, one other thing I thought of, but it's critical. Everybody knows I'm just going to say whatever it is. One of the other reasons that we're in this boat is that we have been agnostic to place for the last 25 to 30 years. We have moved jobs away from where people live, and we've incentivized it. And so when it takes 90 minutes by bus for someone in Akron to get to the Twinsburg job hub, that job is not accessible. And so all of us have to grapple with the fact that we all want everyone in the region to succeed, but place matters. We really have to start thinking more about that.
We're out of time for one, but I also think that's a pretty good note to end on. It underscores your earlier point, James, that the Opportunity Akron strategy is one piece of this, and it's also a theme and a lens that will go throughout all of it. It should affect, those considerations should affect which expansion deals get incentives and where they are located and how close they are to people who might work there and how the training and workforce elements of that play in. So I think it is all of a piece in terms of driving much better outcomes in the opportunity space.
Thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm sure there's many more questions. Fortunately for all of us, we're just here in the beginning of this. We'll be hearing a lot more going forward. So again, thank you all for being with us. On behalf of Akron Roundtable, it is my pleasure to present to each of you a contemplative sun as a memento of your visit with us this afternoon. This celebratory work of art was designed exclusively for Akron Roundtable by local artist Don Drum.